Welcome to the Sleepy Bat. Tonight we sail back to the frost-bitten shores of the Viking world, where winter wasn't just a season but a test of survival. In this episode we'll explore what life was really like when snow sealed the fjords, firewood was more precious than gold, and even the bravest Norse warriors feared the cold. So grab your pillow, close your eyes, and drift with me to the long, frozen winters of the Viking Age. Picture yourself on a frozen fjord in the year 950. The boats are pulled ashore. The sun barely lifts above the horizon, and the air slices through wool and skin alike. Inside the longhouses, families gather around the hearth, bracing for the brutal months ahead. For the Vikings, winter wasn't just cold, it was survival. Each year brought new trials, but some winters were far worse than others. As the Viking Age progressed, harsh cold spells grew more common. The sagas speak of storms that froze the sea, buried homes in snow, and turned livestock shelters into tombs. And yet, even in these frozen nightmares, seeds of resilience and even greatness took root. Eric the Red, exiled in a deadly winter storm, used that time to plan the voyage that would lead him to Greenland. But for most Norse folk, winter was no tale of discovery. It was a daily struggle. Imagine waking up inside a Viking longhouse deep in winter. The air is thick with smoke from the fire pit, and your breath hangs in the freezing air. Around you, your family lies huddled beneath blankets and fur barely moving. The cold creeps in from every crack in the wooden walls, stiffening your fingers before the day even begins. Breakfast is whatever you can spare, maybe porridge, maybe just dried fish and hard bread, warmed by a sip of weak ale. The stores are running low. Every day the threat of hunger grows. Outside, your livestock wait. If they survive the night, you break the ice on their troughs, watching your breath mingle with theirs in the frozen air. You ration the hay, knowing each handful could be the last. Firewood becomes your obsession. You drag branches through knee-deep snow, hands raw, the ache constant. Even the best-stocked homes know if the fire dies, so does the family. This was winter for the average Viking, not a season but a daily fight for survival, and for many, it was a fight they wouldn't win. Yet even in the face of such hardship, the Vikings found ways to maintain their spirits and their sense of community. The long winter nights were filled with storytelling as family members gathered around the hearth to share tales of gods and heroes, of great adventures and mighty deeds. These stories served not just as entertainment, but as a way of preserving the cultural memory of the Norse people, passing down the wisdom and values of their ancestors from one generation to the next. The skald, the court poet, held a place of special honor during these dark months. With their gift for weaving words into memorable verse, they could transform the harsh realities of winter life into epic sagas that inspired and uplifted their listeners. A skilled skald could make even the humblest farmer feel connected to the great heroic tradition of their people, reminding them that they too were part of a story that stretched back to the very beginning of the world. Music and song also played crucial roles in Viking winter survival. The haunting melodies of bone flutes and the rhythmic beating of skin drums helped to chase away the oppressive silence of the frozen landscape. Group singing not only provided entertainment, but also served practical purposes, helping to maintain morale and strengthen the bonds between community members who would need to rely on each other to survive until spring. The Vikings were also remarkably skilled at finding ways to make the most of winter's unique opportunities. Ice fishing became both necessity and art form, with experienced fishermen knowing exactly where to cut holes in the frozen fjords to reach the fish swimming in the dark waters below. The meat from seals and whales hunted during brief breaks in the weather provided crucial protein and fat that could mean the difference between survival and starvation. Winter was also the season for indoor crafts that would be essential for the coming year. Women spent countless hours spinning wool into yarn and weaving it into the sturdy cloth that would clothe their families. Men carved and repaired tools, crafted new weapons, and worked on the intricate wood carvings that decorated their homes and ships. These activities served the dual purpose of producing necessary goods while keeping idle hands busy during the long, dark months. The concept of hygge, that Danish notion of cozy contentment, has its roots in this Viking tradition of making winter bearable through simple pleasures and close companionship. Families would gather in the warmest part of the longhouse, sharing stories, playing board games carved from bone and wood, and finding comfort in each other's presence. These moments of warmth and fellowship were precious beyond measure in a world where survival itself was never guaranteed. Religious observance also took on special significance during the winter months. The Vikings believed that the dark season was a time when the boundaries between the world of the living and the realm of the gods grew thin. The wild hunt of Odin was said to ride across the winter skies, and wise people knew to stay indoors when the wind howled with particular ferocity. Offerings were made to the gods and spirits seeking their protection through the dangerous months ahead. The celebration of Yule, the winter solstice festival, represented the most important religious observance of the Viking year. For 12 days, beginning with the longest night, communities would come together to feast, drink, and celebrate the gradual return of the light. Sacred fires were lit to encourage the sun's return, and oaths were sworn over cups of mead that would bind the community together for the coming year. But Yule was more than just a religious festival. It was a crucial psychological break in the seemingly endless winter. The feasting, though it depleted carefully hoarded food stores, served to remind people that spring would eventually return, that the cycle of death and rebirth would continue as it always had. The gift-giving and hospitality of Yule reinforced the social bonds that made survival possible in such a harsh environment. As we settle deeper into our exploration of Viking winter life, we begin to see how these hardy people developed not just the physical skills necessary for survival, but the mental and spiritual resilience that allowed them to thrive in one of the world's most challenging environments. Their ability to find meaning, beauty, and even joy in the midst of such hardship offers us lessons that remain relevant even in our modern climate-controlled world. The story of Viking winters is far from over, though. We've only begun to scratch the surface of how these remarkable people adapted to their frozen world. In the chapters to come, we'll delve deeper into their ingenious survival strategies, explore the unique challenges faced by different segments of Viking society, and discover how winter shaped not just their daily lives but their entire worldview and culture. But perhaps nowhere was the brutal reality of Viking winter more starkly revealed than in the experiences of those who found themselves caught far from home when the cold descended. The merchant traders who sailed the rivers of Russia, carrying amber and furs to the markets of Constantinople, knew that timing was everything. A delay of even a few weeks could mean the difference between a profitable return home and a winter trapped in hostile territory, dependent on the uncertain hospitality of strangers. One such tale comes to us from the chronicle of Ahmad ibn Fadlan, an Arab diplomat who encountered Viking traders along the Volga River in the early 10th century. He describes meeting a group of Norse merchants who had miscalculated their journey and found themselves stranded as the river began to freeze. These proud warriors, accustomed to commanding respect through their strength and ferocity, were reduced to desperate negotiations with local Slavic tribes, trading away precious silver arm rings and fine weapons just for the promise of shelter and food through the dark months ahead. The psychological toll of such situations was immense. Vikings prided themselves on their independence and self-reliance, yet winter had a way of humbling even the mightiest jarls. The saga of Egil Skallagrimsson tells of how this legendary warrior poet, feared across the northern world for his battle prowess, was brought to tears by the simple sight of his infant daughter blue with cold in their inadequately heated longhouse. No amount of martial skill could fight the creeping frost or summon warmth from empty hearths. For Viking women, winter brought its own particular set of challenges and responsibilities. While the men might dream of spring raids and trading voyages, it fell to the women to manage the intricate logistics of household survival. The lady of the house, whether she was the wife of a wealthy jarl or a simple farmer, became the keeper of the family's life during these dark months. She needed to know exactly how much grain remained in the storage pits, how many sides of preserved meat hung in the smokehouses, and how long the supply of rendered fat would last for both cooking and precious lamp oil. A miscalculation could doom the entire household. These women developed an almost supernatural ability to stretch meager resources, knowing which wild plants could be safely gathered even in winter. How to make nutritious broths from bones that had already been boiled multiple times, and which members of the household could survive on smaller rations when food grew scarce. The spinning and weaving that occupied so many winter hours was not merely busy work, but a matter of survival. Every thread spun by firelight represented warmth for the coming year. The great looms that dominated one end of most longhouses became the center of female social life, where mothers passed down not just technical skills to their daughters, but the accumulated wisdom of generations of women who had survived these brutal seasons. Yet even as they worked, these women had to remain constantly vigilant. The winter birth of a child was always fraught with danger, not just from the usual perils of medieval childbirth, but from the cold itself. Newborns were particularly vulnerable to the low temperatures, and many families lost their youngest members despite desperate efforts to keep them warm. The sight of a mother holding a child who had succumbed to the cold became one of winter's most heartbreaking constants. The elderly faced their own grim calculations as winter approached. In a society where every mouth to feed represented a drain on limited resources, The old often made the terrible decision to walk out into the snow when they felt their strength failing, choosing to die with dignity rather than burden their families. The sagas speak matter-of-factly of this practice, calling it etta stupa, though modern scholars debate whether it was as common as the stories suggest. More often, though, the elderly were treasured during winter months for their knowledge and experience. A grandmother who remembered the winter of 40 years past, when the snow lasted until midsummer, could provide crucial guidance on rationing food and fuel. The old men who had survived dozens of harsh seasons became walking libraries of survival wisdom, their memories filled with techniques for reading weather signs and preserving resources that could mean the difference between life and death. Children, too, had their roles to play in the household's winter survival. Even the youngest were taught to gather every scrap of kindling, to help tend the animals, and to understand that wasting food or fuel could endanger the entire family. Childhood games often mimicked adult survival activities, with young Vikings learning to identify edible plants, track animals through snow, and recognize the signs of approaching storms. The long winter nights became classrooms where practical knowledge was passed down through generations. Children learned not just the heroic tales of gods and warriors, but the more mundane yet vital skills of their ancestors. How to preserve meat in the brief Arctic summer, how to read the behavior of animals to predict weather changes, how to find fresh water when streams were frozen solid. These lessons were delivered in the form of stories and songs that would stick in young minds long after the formal lesson was forgotten. The isolation of winter also fostered a unique form of Viking creativity. With months of enforced indoor living, craftspeople had time to perfect their skills in ways that the busy summer season never allowed. The intricate metalwork that adorned Viking weapons and jewelry, the elaborate wood carvings that decorated longhouse door frames, the complex patterns woven into textiles. All these reached their highest expression during the long winter months when there was time for patience and precision. Some of the most beautiful artifacts of Viking culture were born from winter's enforced creativity. The ornate brooches that fastened women's dresses, the decorative weather vanes that topped the gables of important buildings, the intricate chess pieces carved from walrus ivory. All these treasures emerged from workshops where skilled artisans had months to lavish attention on their craft. But creativity served practical purposes as well. The long winter evenings were when new tools were designed and prototyped, when improvements to ship construction were planned and tested on small models, when the innovations that would give one community an advantage over its neighbors were born. The famous Viking longships, with their shallow drafts and flexible construction, were undoubtedly refined through countless winter evenings of discussion and experimentation by shipwrights with time to think and plan. The psychological challenges of winter were perhaps as dangerous as the physical ones. The endless darkness could drive even the strongest minds to despair. The sagas speak of winter madness, of men and women who simply could not endure another day of cold and darkness and took their own lives rather than face the seeming eternity of winter. Others turned to violence, and domestic disputes that might have been minor irritations in summer could escalate to deadly feuds when families were trapped together in cramped, smoky longhouses for months on end. To combat this mental anguish, Viking communities developed elaborate social rituals designed to maintain morale and community cohesion. The practice of hosting grand feasts, even when food was scarce, served not just to display wealth and generosity, but to provide psychological relief from the oppressive atmosphere of winter survival. These gatherings, with their combination of food, drink, music, and storytelling, created islands of warmth and light in the cold darkness. The tradition of competitive storytelling also served this purpose. Professional entertainers might travel from hall to hall throughout the winter, carrying news and tales from distant communities. But ordinary people also participated, with each trying to top the previous speaker's tale with something more exciting, more frightening, or more amusing. These sessions could last deep into the night, with the audience forgetting their cold and hunger in the spell of a well-told story. Gaming, too, provided crucial mental relief. Archaeological evidence shows that Vikings were passionate players of board games, particularly a strategy game called Hnefatafl, similar to chess but with different rules and objectives. These games provided intellectual stimulation during the long, dark months, and skilled players were respected members of their communities. The ability to think several moves ahead in a complex game was seen as excellent training for the strategic thinking required in warfare and leadership. The brewing and consumption of alcoholic beverages also played a crucial role in winter survival, though not just for the obvious reasons. While mead, ale, and imported wine certainly helped numb the psychological pain of winter hardship, they also served important social and nutritional functions. The communal sharing of drinks reinforced social bonds and hierarchies, while the calories and nutrients in fermented beverages provided essential sustenance when other foods were scarce. The production of these beverages was itself a crucial winter activity. The brewing of ale required careful timing and temperature control, skills that Viking women perfected over generations. The fermentation process also produced valuable byproducts, including nutritious yeast that could supplement winter diets and spent grains that could feed livestock when hay ran low. As winter deepened and the coldest months arrived, even the most carefully laid plans could be tested beyond their limits. Blizzards could last for days, trapping families in their longhouses with no way to reach their stored food or tend their animals. The archaeological record shows evidence of emergency food caches hidden in various locations around Viking settlements, insurance against the possibility that the main storehouses might become inaccessible during severe weather. These emergency preparations reveal the sophisticated understanding Vikings had developed of their environment's dangers. They knew that survival often depended not just on having enough resources, but on being able to access those resources when they were most needed. Hidden caches of dried fish, nuts, and preserved meat were scattered throughout their territories, marked by subtle signs that family members could recognize even in the confusion of a blizzard. The community aspect of winter survival cannot be overstated. While individual families might have their own resources and preparations, the harsh reality was that no one could survive entirely alone. Neighbors checked on each other regularly, sharing fuel when one household's supply ran low, providing extra food when a family faced unexpected hardship, and offering shelter when storms damaged homes. This mutual dependence created strong social bonds that extended far beyond the winter months. The man who shared his last cord of firewood with a struggling neighbor could count on reciprocal generosity in future seasons. The woman who helped deliver a baby during a winter storm earned the lifelong gratitude and support of that family. These networks of mutual obligation and support were as crucial to Viking survival as their famous weapons and ships. The concept of honor took on special meaning during these frozen months. While summer might bring opportunities for glory in battle or successful trading expeditions, winter tested a different kind of courage. The quiet heroism of a father who ventured out into a howling blizzard to save a trapped sheep. The steadfast determination of a mother who stayed awake all night feeding a dying fire to keep her children warm. These acts of everyday bravery were celebrated in their own way. The sagas tell us of Gunnar the Steadfast, a simple farmer whose name would never have been remembered for martial prowess, but who became legendary for his winter endurance. During the terrible cold of 1034, when 3 neighboring families had exhausted their food stores by midwinter, Gunnar shared his own carefully rationed supplies, reducing his own family's portions to keep his neighbors alive. When spring finally arrived, all 4 families survived, but Gunnar had grown so thin that his own children barely recognized him. Dumamon, chudast. Such stories were not mere entertainment, but served as moral instruction for future generations. They taught that true strength was not just the ability to swing a sword or command a longship, but the capacity to endure suffering while maintaining one's humanity and responsibility to others. These winter heroes became as important to Viking culture as their more famous warriors and explorers. The spiritual dimension of winter survival was equally complex. The Vikings understood their harsh environment through the lens of their mythology, seeing in winter's fury the breath of the ice giants who threatened to bring about Ragnarok, the end of the world. Yet they also recognized winter as a necessary part of the cosmic cycle, the death that must precede rebirth, the darkness that gave meaning to light. The god Baldur's death, mourned throughout the winter months, represented this seasonal dying of the world, but his promised return at Ragnarok's end gave hope that spring would indeed come again. This mythological framework provided not just comfort but practical wisdom, reminding the Norse people that even the harshest winter was temporary, part of a larger pattern that had meaning and purpose. Shamanic practices inherited from even more ancient traditions also played a role in winter survival. The satyr practitioners, often women, claimed the ability to see through the veils between worlds, to predict weather patterns and to communicate with the spirits of ancestors who had survived previous winters. Whether one believed in their supernatural abilities or not, these individuals often possessed practical knowledge accumulated over generations, understanding of weather signs and survival techniques that could prove invaluable The long nights also provided opportunities for divination and fortune-telling. Runes were cast by firelight, seeking guidance about when the worst weather might pass or which stores should be conserved most carefully. These practices served psychological functions as well as practical ones, giving people a sense of agency and hope during months when so much seemed beyond human control. Dreams took on special significance during the winter months. The extended periods of sleep necessitated by the cold and darkness led to vivid, memorable dreams that were often interpreted as messages from the gods or visits from deceased relatives. The sharing and interpretation of dreams became another form of winter entertainment, but also a way of processing the psychological stress of survival in such harsh conditions. The treatment of mental illness during winter reveals both the understanding and the limitations of Viking knowledge. They recognized that some people suffered more than others from what we might now call seasonal depression, and they had developed various remedies. Exposure to light from carefully tended fires, consumption of certain herbs and mushrooms, and participation in vigorous physical activities when weather permitted were all prescribed for those who fell into winter melancholy. Yet for those whose conditions were more severe, the options were limited. Some were cared for by their families with remarkable patience and devotion. Others were seen as touched by the gods, their ravings interpreted as prophecy. But in the harshest circumstances, when resources were stretched to the breaking point, difficult decisions had to be made about who could be supported through the winter months. The preparation of the dead during winter presented its own unique challenges. The ground was too frozen for burial, so bodies had to be stored until spring thaw made grave digging possible. This necessity led to elaborate preservation techniques and temporary burial practices that varied from region to region. Some bodies were placed in snow caves, others in specially constructed ice houses, and still others were stored in the coldest parts of buildings until proper burial could be arranged. These practices, while practical, also influenced Viking beliefs about death and the afterlife. The long period between death and burial was seen as a time when the deceased's spirit remained close to the living world, sometimes providing guidance or warnings to their surviving family members. The spring burial ceremonies thus took on added significance as the final release of the dead to their eternal rest. Trade and commerce, so central to Viking prosperity, faced enormous challenges during winter months. Rivers froze, making water transport impossible. Overland routes became treacherous with snow and ice, yet ingenious merchants found ways to continue their activities even in the harshest conditions. Skis and sleds allowed for limited transport of high-value goods. Ice roads, when rivers froze thick enough, could actually provide smoother passage than summer's muddy tracks. The famous Viking trade routes along Russian rivers required careful timing to avoid winter's grip. Merchants who miscalculated their journeys could find themselves trapped for months in foreign territories, dependent on the hospitality of local rulers who might view them as unwelcome burdens rather than valuable trading partners. The diplomatic skills required to survive such situations were as important as any martial prowess. Winter markets, when they occurred at all, took on a different character from their summer counterparts. Goods were scarce and precious, with essential items like preserved food, warm clothing, and fuel commanding premium prices. The social aspect of these gatherings was as important as the commercial one, providing opportunities for isolated communities to share news, arrange marriages, and maintain the social networks that were so crucial for survival. The impact of winter on Viking expansion and exploration was profound. The seasonal nature of their sailing meant that new territories had to be thoroughly explored and evaluated during the brief summer months, with permanent settlement decisions often made based on incomplete information about winter conditions. Many promising settlements were abandoned after a single brutal winter proved them unsustainable. The famous settlement of Vinland in North America may have fallen victim to this pattern. Archaeological evidence suggests that the Norse colonists arrived during favorable weather conditions, but encountered winters more severe than they had anticipated. Without the support networks and accumulated supplies that made survival possible in Iceland and Greenland, the small Vinland colony could not sustain itself through the harsh North American winters. Even successful settlements faced constant challenges from winter weather. The Greenland colonies established by Eric the Red and his followers thrived for several centuries but eventually succumbed to a combination of climate change and isolation. As global temperatures dropped during the onset of the Little Ice Age, winters in Greenland became progressively harsher, making agriculture increasingly difficult and cutting off the sea routes that connected the colonies to Iceland and Norway. The psychological impact of failed settlements was enormous. Families who had invested everything in new colonies only to see them fail due to unexpected winter severity often returned to their homelands traumatized and impoverished. These experiences fed back into Viking culture, creating a healthy respect for winter's power that influenced settlement decisions for generations. The technology of winter survival was constantly evolving. Each generation of Vikings refined the techniques passed down by their ancestors, developing better methods for preserving food, more efficient heating systems, and improved clothing designed for extreme cold. The famous Viking cloaks, with their distinctive brooches and layered construction, were the result of centuries of experimentation in creating garments that could keep their wearers alive in subarctic conditions. Footwear was particularly crucial, and Viking craftsmen became expert at creating boots that could provide both warmth and traction on icy surfaces. Archaeological finds reveal sophisticated construction techniques with multiple layers of leather, fur, and sometimes even grass insulation. The wealthy could afford boots lined with expensive furs, while common people made do with sheep's wool or even packed grass for insulation. The construction of longhouses also reflected generations of winter survival experience. The thick walls, often built with a double layer of logs with insulation packed between. The careful positioning of the central hearth to maximize heat distribution. The small windows that could be shuttered against storms, all these features were refined through trial and error over many harsh winters. Storage technology was equally important. The underground cellars where Vikings kept their preserved foods had to be designed to prevent freezing while also protecting against rodents and other pests. The smokehouses where fish and meat were preserved required precise control of temperature and airflow to produce food that would remain edible throughout the winter months. As our journey through the brutal Viking winters continues, we begin to see how these challenges shaped not just individual lives, but the entire trajectory of Norse civilization. The need to survive harsh winters influenced everything from their religious beliefs to their social structures, from their technological innovations to their patterns of exploration and settlement. Winter was not just a season to be endured, but a fundamental force that molded the Viking character and culture in ways that would echo through history. The knowledge and skills developed through centuries of winter survival would serve the Vikings well as they expanded across the known world, allowing them to thrive in harsh environments that defeated other peoples. Their understanding of ice and snow, their ability to preserve food for long journeys, their skill at finding shelter and warmth in hostile conditions, all these capabilities that were forged in the brutal winters of Scandinavia would become crucial advantages in their far-flung adventures. But the story of how these remarkable people not only survived but prospered in one of the world's most challenging environments is far from complete. The ingenuity, courage, and sheer stubborn determination that characterized Viking winter survival would be tested again and again as climate patterns shifted and new challenges emerged. Their responses to these tests would ultimately determine not just individual survival but the fate of entire communities and the future of Norse civilization itself. The ingenuity of Viking winter survival extended far beyond mere endurance. These resourceful people developed what we might call a complete winter ecology, a sophisticated understanding of how to work with nature's harshest moods rather than simply fighting against them. They learned to read the subtle signs that preceded the worst storms, watching the behavior of birds and the patterns of cloud formation with the intensity of modern meteorologists. An experienced Viking farmer could predict a blizzard days in advance by observing how his livestock behaved, how the smoke from his hearth dispersed in the air, even how the ice formed on the water buckets outside his door. This knowledge wasn't written down in books, but passed through generations by careful observation and patient teaching. A grandfather might spend an entire winter teaching his grandson to recognize the particular quality of light that preceded a 3-day storm, or the way the wind changed direction before the temperature plummeted. The Vikings also developed remarkable techniques for finding and maintaining sources of fresh water during the frozen months. Rivers and streams might freeze solid, but experienced water finders knew how to locate springs that continued flowing beneath the ice, how to identify snow that would melt into the cleanest drinking water, and how to store precious liquid without letting it freeze in their containers. Some families became legendary for their ability to locate these hidden water sources. Old Bjorn the water finder, according to one saga fragment, could walk across a frozen landscape and point to spots where his neighbors should dig to find flowing water beneath the ice. Whether this skill was based on careful observation of terrain and vegetation, or some deeper understanding of hydrology, it made the difference between communities that thrived and those that merely survived. The preparation of winter clothing became an art form in itself. Viking women spent months each year creating the layered garments that would keep their families alive through the coldest weather. The process began in summer with the careful selection and preparation of materials. Not all wool was suitable for winter clothing. The finest threads came from sheep that had been specially fed and cared for, their fleeces processed with techniques that had been refined over centuries. The wealthy could afford imported furs from the far north, where Arctic foxes and polar bears provided pelts of unmatched warmth. But common families became expert at making the most of local materials. Rabbit fur, carefully prepared and sewn into linings, could provide surprising warmth. Even bird feathers collected throughout the summer and carefully cleaned could be used to create insulating layers that trapped body heat. The sewing techniques themselves were crucial. A poorly made seam could let in deadly drafts, while a well-constructed garment could mean the difference between comfort and hypothermia. Young girls learned these skills by making clothes for their dolls, progressing to simple garments for younger siblings, and finally mastering the complex construction of adult winter wear. The psychological warfare against winter despair required constant vigilance and creativity. Families developed elaborate rituals and traditions designed to maintain hope during the darkest months. Some kept calendars made of notched sticks, marking off each day as it passed and celebrating small milestones on the journey toward spring. Others maintained special foods or drinks that were only consumed on the most difficult days, creating positive associations with the worst weather. The practice of competitive poetry and riddle solving served not just as entertainment, but as mental exercise that kept minds sharp during months when physical activity was limited. A skilled riddler could pose puzzles that would occupy an entire household for days, with everyone contributing possible solutions and debating the merits of different interpretations. These intellectual challenges provided a sense of accomplishment and progress even when the outside world seemed frozen in time. Music played an even more crucial role than the sagas suggest. While we know about the formal entertainment provided by professional skalds, every household had its own musical traditions. Simple instruments made from bone, wood, and stretched hide could fill a longhouse with melodies that lifted spirits and encouraged community singing. The rhythm of group singing helped coordinate work activities from spinning thread to preparing food, making tedious tasks more bearable through shared effort. Some families specialized in particular types of songs. There were working songs for different activities, lullabies designed to help children sleep despite the cold, and ceremonial chants for marking important moments in the winter calendar. The complexity of these musical traditions suggests that Vikings understood the profound psychological power of organized sound to influence mood and maintain social cohesion. Dance, too, served important functions beyond mere entertainment. The vigorous movements of traditional Norse dances helped maintain physical fitness during months of enforced inactivity, while the social nature of group dancing reinforced community bonds. Archaeological evidence suggests that many longhouses had spaces specifically designed for dancing, with packed earth floors that could accommodate the movements of dozens of people. The treatment of illness during winter required both practical knowledge and psychological insight. Viking healers understood that many winter ailments were caused as much by despair and isolation as by cold and poor nutrition. Their treatments often combined herbal remedies with social interventions, prescribing not just medicinal teas but also increased participation in community activities for those suffering from winter melancholy. The healing traditions were predominantly maintained by women, who developed sophisticated understanding of which herbs could be preserved through the winter months and how to prepare them for maximum effectiveness. They knew which mushrooms could safely supplement winter diets and provide essential nutrients, which tree barks could be brewed into teas that eased respiratory ailments, and which combinations of preserved ingredients could create warming broths that restored both physical strength and mental clarity. Some healers achieved almost legendary status for their ability to guide people through the worst psychological challenges of winter. Sigurd the Far-Seer, mentioned in several different saga accounts, was said to possess an uncanny ability to know exactly when someone was reaching the breaking point of winter despair. She would appear at households just when her intervention was most needed, bringing not just herbal remedies but also stories, songs, and practical wisdom that helped families rediscover their strength. The economic systems that sustained Viking communities through winter were remarkably sophisticated. Families didn't just prepare for their own survival but participated in complex networks of mutual obligation and resource sharing that distributed risk across entire regions. A farmer whose grain stores were damaged by an early freeze could count on assistance from neighbors, knowing that he would be expected to reciprocate when fortune favored him. These economic relationships were formalized through elaborate gift-giving ceremonies that took place throughout the winter months. The exchange of presents wasn't simply generosity but a way of maintaining and strengthening the social bonds that made survival possible. A gift of preserved fish from a successful fisher to a struggling farmer created obligations and expectations that would influence their relationship for years to come. The wealthy played crucial roles in these networks, not just as sources of emergency assistance but as coordinators of community-wide survival strategies. A successful jarl might maintain detailed mental records of which families had which resources, which skills were available in the community, and how to organize collective responses to winter emergencies. When severe storms threatened to destroy grain stores or livestock shelters, it was often the local leader who organized community work parties to make repairs and redistribute losses. These leaders understood that their own long-term prosperity depended on the survival of the entire community, creating incentives for enlightened self-interest that benefited everyone. The religious dimensions of winter survival were deeply integrated into daily life rather than separated into formal ceremonies. Every major household task had its associated prayers or rituals designed to ensure success and ward off disaster. The lighting of the morning fire was accompanied by specific words intended to honor the spirits of hearth and home. The distribution of food included offerings to ancestral spirits who were believed to watch over the family's welfare. The boundaries between practical knowledge and spiritual belief were often blurred in ways that served important psychological functions. A technique for predicting weather might be taught as both a matter of careful observation and as communication with supernatural forces. This dual understanding provided both practical benefits and emotional comfort, giving people multiple frameworks for understanding and coping with their challenging environment. The winter solstice represented the culmination of these religious practices, marking not just the astronomical turning point toward longer days, but also the spiritual renewal that made continued survival possible. The celebrations that surrounded this period were carefully designed to provide maximum psychological impact, using light, warmth, food, and community gathering to create powerful positive associations that would sustain people through the remaining winter months. Some communities developed unique local traditions that reflected their particular circumstances and challenges. Coastal settlements might honor the spirits of the sea ice, asking for safe passage for hunters and protection from storm surges that could devastate shore-based communities. Mountain communities developed rituals focused on avalanche protection and the proper relationship with the fierce winds that could strip away carefully constructed shelters. The children born during winter months were often seen as especially blessed, having survived the most dangerous time of year from their very first breath. These winter children were sometimes given names that reflected their hardy origins, and they often received special training in survival skills from an early age. Some grew up to become the most capable and respected members of their communities, their early experience with hardship preparing them for leadership roles. The education of children during winter months was intensely practical but also deeply cultural. Young people learned not just the technical skills they would need to survive, but also the stories, songs, and values that defined their identity as Vikings. The long winter evenings provided opportunities for intensive cultural transmission that the busy summer months couldn't match. Older children were given increasing responsibility for crucial survival tasks, learning through direct participation rather than abstract instruction. A 12-year-old might be entrusted with maintaining the household's fire during the night, understanding that everyone's survival depended on their vigilance and skill. These responsibilities built confidence and competence that would serve them throughout their lives. The games and competitions that occupied winter evenings often had direct survival applications. Board games taught strategic thinking that could be applied to resource management and conflict resolution. Physical contests helped maintain fitness and fighting skills during months when opportunities for exercise were limited. Even storytelling competitions developed the verbal skills and cultural knowledge that were essential for leadership and diplomacy. As we continue our journey through these frozen centuries, we begin to understand that Viking winter survival was not simply a matter of individual toughness or family preparation. It represented a complete way of life, a comprehensive approach to existing in harmony with one of nature's most challenging environments. The techniques and traditions they developed would influence not just their own survival, but the entire trajectory of medieval European civilization. The networks of trade and communication that sustained Viking communities through winter would become the foundation for their expansion across the medieval world. The skills they developed in reading weather patterns and navigating by subtle environmental signs would serve them well as they explored unknown seas. The social structures that distributed survival risks across communities would be adapted to organize trading expeditions and military campaigns. Most importantly, the mental resilience forged in the crucible of Arctic winters would become one of the defining characteristics of Viking culture. The ability to maintain hope and determination in the face of seemingly impossible challenges, to find joy and meaning even in the darkest circumstances, to work together for mutual survival while maintaining individual dignity and honor. These qualities would shape the Norse approach to every challenge they encountered. The brutal winters that tested every generation of Vikings were not just obstacles to be overcome, but foundational experiences that created the cultural DNA of one of history's most influential civilizations. As we prepare to delve even deeper into their world, we carry with us a growing appreciation for the complexity and sophistication of their response to nature's harshest challenges, and a deeper understanding of how extreme conditions can forge extraordinary human capabilities. The psychological impact of these endless winter months extended far beyond what modern minds can easily comprehend. In our world of electric lights and climate control, we struggle to imagine the profound darkness that settled over Viking communities like a living thing. The sun, when it appeared at all during the deepest winter months, hung so low on the horizon that it cast more shadow than light. For weeks at a time in the far north, it might not appear above the horizon at all, leaving communities to exist in a twilight world illuminated only by flickering fires and the occasional aurora dancing across the star-filled sky. This darkness was not merely an inconvenience but a genuine threat to mental health and community stability. The Vikings understood this instinctively, developing elaborate strategies to combat what they called the black mood that could settle over individuals and entire households during the worst months. They knew that a person consumed by winter melancholy could become a danger not just to themselves but to everyone who depended on them for survival. The role of light in Viking winter culture cannot be overstated. Every flame was precious, not just for its warmth, but for its psychological power to hold back the crushing weight of darkness. Families went to extraordinary lengths to maintain continuous fires throughout the winter months, with different members taking shifts through the night to ensure that the hearth never went cold. The extinguishing of a household fire was considered not just a practical disaster but a spiritual catastrophe that could doom the entire family. Wealthy households might maintain multiple fires burning simultaneously, not from waste, but from understanding that light and warmth were essential for maintaining the mental health of their extended families and dependents. The great halls of successful jarls were famous not just for their size, but for their brightness, with carefully tended fires casting dancing shadows on richly decorated walls and creating islands of warmth and light that drew people from across the community. The crafting of candles and oil lamps became specialized skills that were highly valued during winter months. While summer brought abundant opportunities for collecting the materials needed for illumination, The dark months required careful rationing of these precious resources. Families learned to extract oil from fish, seals, and whales with remarkable efficiency. Understanding that every drop represented hours of precious light during the darkest nights. Some communities developed sophisticated systems for sharing light resources, with households taking turns hosting evening gatherings that allowed neighbors to benefit from each other's illumination while conserving their own supplies. These rotating social events served multiple purposes, providing light, warmth, companionship, and entertainment while distributing the costs of winter survival across the entire community. The Vikings also discovered that certain activities were particularly effective at combating winter depression. Vigorous physical exercise, when possible, helped maintain both physical and mental health. Indoor games that required intense concentration could distract from the oppressive atmosphere of endless cold and darkness. Group singing and music making created shared experiences that lifted spirits and reinforced social bonds. The preparation and consumption of special foods also played important roles in winter mental health. Certain spices and herbs carefully preserved from summer harvests were reserved for the darkest months when their flavors could provide not just nutrition but psychological comfort. The brewing of special ales and meads for winter consumption required planning and skill, but the results provided both caloric sustenance and mood-lifting effects that were crucial for survival. The storytelling traditions that flourished during winter months were carefully crafted to serve psychological as well as entertainment purposes. The most skilled storytellers understood how to gauge their audience's mood and select tales that would provide exactly the right combination of excitement, comfort, and hope. A community sunk in despair might need heroic tales of triumph over impossible odds, while a group grown restless from confinement might benefit from adventure stories that allowed them to experience vicarious travel and exploration. These stories were not just recounted but actively performed, with skilled narrators using voice, gesture, and even simple props to bring their tales to life. The flickering firelight that illuminated these performances created an intimate, almost magical atmosphere that transported listeners far from their cold, confined reality into worlds of gods and heroes, adventure and romance. The seasonal festivals that marked the progression through winter served as crucial psychological waypoints, breaking the seemingly endless months into manageable segments and providing regular occasions for hope and celebration. Each festival was carefully timed to provide maximum psychological benefit, often coinciding with astronomical events or subtle changes in daylight that marked genuine progress toward spring's return. The Feast of Yule, lasting 12 days around the winter solstice, represented the most elaborate of these celebrations. But smaller observances throughout the winter months provided regular opportunities for community gathering, special foods, gift-giving, and the renewal of social bonds that were essential for collective survival. These celebrations required significant investment of precious resources, but communities understood that the psychological benefits justified the costs. The treatment of mental illness during winter months revealed both the sophistication and limitations of Viking understanding of human psychology. They recognized that some individuals were particularly vulnerable to winter depression and developed various strategies for helping these people survive the dark months. Mild cases might be treated with increased social interaction, special foods, exposure to firelight, and participation in vigorous activities. More severe cases required more intensive interventions. Some communities had individuals who specialized in what we might call primitive psychotherapy, using combinations of counseling, herbal treatments, and spiritual practices to help people work through their winter despair. These healers understood the importance of maintaining hope and providing frameworks for understanding suffering that allowed people to endure even the most difficult circumstances. The Vikings also recognized that certain personality types were better suited to winter survival than others. They valued individuals who could maintain steady, positive attitudes during extended periods of hardship, and these people often became informal leaders during the darkest months. The ability to keep others' spirits up during winter was considered as valuable as skill in battle or expertise in crafts. The physical challenges of winter survival required constant adaptation and innovation. The Vikings developed remarkable expertise in reading weather patterns, understanding that survival often depended on accurately predicting when conditions would become dangerous. They learned to recognize the subtle signs that preceded major storms, from changes in animal behavior to shifts in wind patterns and cloud formations. This weather prediction knowledge was considered so valuable that it was often closely guarded within families and passed down through generations like precious heirlooms. A grandfather might spend an entire winter teaching his grandson to recognize the particular quality of light that appeared before a blizzard, or the way ice formed on water containers that indicated a severe cold snap was approaching. The construction techniques used in Viking buildings reflected centuries of accumulated wisdom about surviving extreme weather. The positioning of structures, the orientation of doors and windows, the thickness of walls, and the design of roofing systems were all optimized for winter survival. Even the interior layout of longhouses was carefully planned to maximize heat retention and provide protection against the psychological stresses of confinement. The most successful Viking communities developed sophisticated systems for emergency response during winter crises. When severe storms threatened to destroy buildings or cut off access to food stores, pre-planned protocols ensured that everyone knew their roles in community-wide survival efforts. These systems included designated emergency shelters, cached supplies, and communication methods that could function even in the worst weather conditions. The Vikings understood that winter survival was ultimately a community effort that required the active participation of every member of society. Children were taught from an early age that their individual survival depended on the welfare of the entire group, creating strong incentives for cooperation and mutual support. Adults understood that their own long-term prosperity required investing in the survival of their neighbors and community members. This collective approach to winter survival created social bonds that extended far beyond the cold months, The networks of mutual obligation and support that were essential for surviving harsh winters became the foundation for Viking society's remarkable cohesion and effectiveness in other areas of life. The same cooperation that allowed communities to survive Arctic conditions also enabled their success in trade, exploration, and military endeavors. The legacy of Viking winter survival techniques extended far beyond their immediate historical period. Many of the strategies they developed for living in extreme cold were adopted by other northern peoples and continued to influence Arctic survival practices for centuries. Their understanding of community cooperation in the face of environmental challenges provided models that were adapted by other societies facing similar conditions. The psychological resilience that Vikings developed through repeated exposure to extreme winter conditions became one of their most distinctive cultural characteristics. Their ability to maintain hope and determination in the face of seemingly impossible challenges, to find meaning and even joy in the midst of severe hardship, became legendary throughout the medieval world. Modern research into extreme environment psychology has validated many of the intuitive understandings that Vikings developed about maintaining mental health during prolonged exposure to harsh conditions. Their emphasis on social support, regular celebrations, meaningful work, and the maintenance of hope align closely with contemporary best practices for helping people survive extreme situations. The story of Viking winter survival also reveals the remarkable human capacity for adaptation and innovation in the face of environmental challenges. These hardy people not only learned to survive in one of the world's most difficult climates, but actually thrived, using their harsh environment as a training ground that prepared them for success in every area of life. As we continue our journey through the frozen centuries of Viking experience, we gain deeper appreciation for the complexity and sophistication of their response to nature's challenges. Their winter survival strategies were not simply collections of practical techniques, but comprehensive approaches to living that integrated physical, psychological, social, and spiritual elements into coherent systems for human flourishing under extreme conditions. The knowledge and wisdom they accumulated through generations of winter survival would serve as the foundation for some of humanity's most remarkable achievements in exploration, trade, and cultural development. The same qualities that allowed them to survive Arctic winters also enabled them to navigate unknown seas, establish settlements in hostile environments, and build trading networks that spanned continents. The brutal winters that tested every generation of Vikings were not merely obstacles to be overcome, but formative experiences that shaped their character, their culture, and their approach to every challenge they encountered. As we prepare to explore even more deeply into their remarkable world, we carry with us a growing understanding of how extreme conditions can forge extraordinary human capabilities and create civilizations of lasting influence and achievement. As the endless cycle of brutal winters continued to shape Viking civilization, we begin to see how these frozen months became the crucible in which an entire culture was forged. The techniques they developed, the bonds they formed, and the resilience they cultivated during these dark seasons would ultimately define not just their survival, but their extraordinary expansion across the medieval world. The children who grew up in these harsh conditions emerged as adults uniquely prepared for any challenge life might present. They had learned patience during the long, dark months when activity was limited. They understood the value of community cooperation through seasons when individual survival was impossible. Most importantly, they had developed an unshakable faith that even the worst hardships were temporary, that spring would always return, and that human ingenuity could overcome seemingly impossible obstacles. These winter-forged Vikings would go on to navigate uncharted seas with the same steady determination they had shown while rationing grain stores. They would establish settlements in hostile new lands with the same careful planning they had used to prepare for Arctic winters. They would face unknown enemies with the same courage they had shown while venturing into blizzards to save trapped livestock. The trading networks that would make Vikings famous throughout Europe were built on relationships first established during winter months, when communities shared resources and supported each other through the darkest times. The trust and mutual obligation that made these commercial partnerships possible were forged in longhouses where families had depended on each other for survival. Even their famous longships, those magnificent vessels that carried Viking explorers to the edges of the known world, reflected the lessons learned during countless winters. The flexible construction that allowed these ships to bend with ocean waves was inspired by building techniques developed for structures that had to withstand the enormous stresses of winter storms and shifting ice. The democratic assemblies where Vikings made collective decisions about laws and leadership were natural extensions of the community cooperation that was essential for winter survival. The same skills needed to organize successful responses to winter emergencies translated directly into the ability to govern complex societies and coordinate large-scale expeditions. As our journey through these frozen centuries draws to a close, we are left with profound respect for the ingenuity, courage, and determination of these remarkable people. They faced challenges that would have defeated lesser civilizations, yet they not only survived but transformed their harsh environment into a source of strength and advantage. The next time you find yourself complaining about a cold winter day or struggling with seasonal depression, perhaps you might remember these hardy Norse ancestors. They endured months of darkness and cold that would challenge our modern understanding of human endurance. Yet they found ways to create joy, meaning, and beauty even in the midst of such hardship. Their legacy reminds us that the human spirit is capable of extraordinary resilience when faced with extreme challenges. The same creativity, cooperation, and determination that allowed Vikings to survive brutal Arctic winters are qualities that remain within us today, waiting to be called upon when we face our own difficult seasons. As you drift off to sleep tonight, warm and comfortable in your climate-controlled environment, carry with you the knowledge that you descend from people who conquered winter itself through nothing more than human ingenuity, community cooperation, and unbreakable determination. Their strength lives on in you, a reminder that no winter lasts forever and that spring always returns to those who have the courage to endure. Sweet dreams, and may your rest be filled with visions of dancing aurora and the promise of longer days ahead. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the brutal Viking winters, and remember to subscribe for more peaceful historical tales to accompany your slumber. Until next time, sleep well, knowing that you carry within you the same indomitable spirit that guided our ancestors through the darkest and coldest nights in human history.